Kimra Major Morris, and welcome to a special COVID-19 edition of Legal Connections. In this program, you'll hear important information about the coronavirus and the impact it's having on society. And joining us for this discussion is FAMU College of Law Professor LeRoy Pernell. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Professor, give us your thoughts in general about the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, I think we are facing something that certainly is unprecedented in recent history. We had maybe 100 years ago a pandemic on the scale of what we have now. This is a world changer, it's a country changer. And I think that, at least from my perspective, our governmental and legal systems are going to have to make some drastic adjustments because of this crisis. And some of those adjustments may change the way in which we live and do business permanently.
I agree. And what are your thoughts as you watch the impact on COVID-19, the impact it's having especially in the Black community?
Well, I think one of the things we're seeing, of course, there's a disproportionate death rate among persons of color, which can come from a number of different reasons, but I think it does point out that the underlying deficiencies in the healthcare system in terms of communities of color are being brought to light by this system, both in terms of inadequate medical care, diagnosis, and decision making as to how aggressive treatment will be. These are all issues of what typically has been called medical racial justice in terms of how systems respond. And so when you have those weaknesses already in your health system, in your social service network, a crisis like this will exacerbate those. And like the old saying goes, if everyone else has a cold, this causes pneumonia in the Black community.
Absolutely. Now, it's hitting close to home. I remember at first we were hearing the numbers and I didn't know anyone at first. And then it seems like one day I turned on my Facebook page and all these people that I knew someone, and I've had at least one relative that has overcome it. Has it hit close to home for you?
Well, it's hit close to me primarily. I have a sister-in-law who is a registered nurse in the New York hospitals, and she's on the front lines, and she's had to deal with this tremendous volume of people needing care, and she's exhausted in what she does. I have another sister-in-law who's in the military and medical services in the military in Italy. So they were at ground zero in Europe for this outbreak, and so they have been they're in Sicily, and they've been isolated throughout this. And so I've tried to keep in touch with them, but they're sort of frontline witnesses as to what's going on.
Yeah, and you just have to, it just gives you a whole new level of respect for the first responders. I have a friend who flew to New York to work at the hospitals there from New Orleans, and they're working 12-hour shifts, some of them, and you just, I said
Yes.
to her that she ran into the burning building, right? So, well, describe the experience from a professor's perspective.
Well, this has been a game changer in so many ways, certainly in a way in which we conduct instruction. The legal profession has had challenges, quite frankly, in the past with trying to do online learning. And so we've had to deal with those on a relatively fast track. I think we've been able to be successful in doing that, to give a meaningful legal education experience through the technologies that are now available. It also has impacted me as far as teaching when I hear about the challenges that our students are facing. I have students in my class who have life and death situations going on because of this. Since we are not in session live right now, my students are spread all over the country and all over the world. and they're telling me about situations that they're facing in the communities where they reside. So it's an eye opener for us. It makes us challenge how we teach. It challenges us in terms of what we teach. I think that we have to make our instruction relevant to the concerns and needs that people are facing now. It's not just theoretic anymore. It's a world changer. It's a life alterer, and the law has to make those adjustments, and we have to instruct our students on how to use the law to make those adjustments.
And speaking of the law, let's get into that. We're hearing more and more about nursing homes and deaths from COVID-19. What rights do the victims' families have?
Well, I think that we have new protocols that's built on old principles. And what I mean by that is that individuals who've been placed in the care of a nursing home, the nursing home and the staff and the system owes them a special duty of care and making sure that they have access to the best medical services that they can reasonably afford. And I think that what we're seeing with the pandemic of this scale, it's testing our nursing home system. And in terms of rights and liabilities, it's forcing our nursing home systems to fall back on their basic responsibility of being reasonable in how they treat and care for patients. And reasonableness means that they have to be able to reasonably foresee where there are threats, reasonably protect, and reasonably process the needs of their residents. Now, no nursing home can guarantee that anyone will not become ill or become a casualty of this system. That's what a pandemic is. And it's not anyone's fault that there is a pandemic. But it does mean that nursing homes, as well as other institutions, must act reasonably in terms of how they provide care. Now, nursing homes, like so many other facets of our community right now, have been faced with shortages in terms of supplies, of personnel, and I think that that's all part of how you engage in reasonable decision making. They certainly need those the personnel and those supplies, and if they have made reasonable efforts to obtain them, then they're not going to be faulted on that. They're not insurers of the patients. But I do think when you hear about conduct and situations in nursing homes where patients are neglected, where patients are abandoned, and that's not all nursing homes. That's only in some circumstances. It does cause concern, and it may be that those individuals and their families may need to seek the advice of legal counsel as to what their rights and remedies will be. Nursing homes are, in addition to being subject to our general laws of liability and responsibility, are also what we refer to as a highly regulated industry. That is, that there are substantial federal, state, and local controls and requirements for nursing homes, and that they have to follow. And when they don't do that, it creates not only a possibility of harm for the residents, but also liability, both criminal and civil, in some instances, for failure to follow state and federal regulations. So that's being tested right now. There is some tendency to people want to engage in a blame game, but I think that everybody wants all of us to be responsible in what we do and obey the law and follow its regulations. There's a lot of talk right now about trying to put in place some special provisions for law schools regarding for nursing homes regarding their liability and their exposure to liability. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I think that for those who want to advocate on behalf of the patients and residents of the nursing homes, they should not hesitate to get legal advice, both private legal advice and from government oversight agencies as to what their rights and responsibilities are.
Oh my goodness, it's such a tough spot to be in, from the legal perspective and just on the personal side. My dad was recently in a nursing home for probably 4 months, and just the inability for family to go in and, as we say, lay eyes on the family member, and all kinds of things, your imagination runs wild. So do you expect to see a flood of lawsuits after the pandemic?
Well, I think we will see some. I don't know if you can describe it as a flood, but it certainly will probably be a significant increase. Not because nursing homes will be blamed for the pandemic. We can't do that. That's what's known as an act of God. But we'll see increased focus on situations that could have been handled differently, that reasonably should have been handled differently in terms of how patients and residents were handled in the nursing homes. I think our legal system is robust enough that it can sort out the cases that meritoriously should proceed and those that are without merit. I think one of the biggest challenges for nursing homes and for the system will be having to face those legal challenges and the resources that it costs, even if you win, of having to face claims that you didn't do your job correctly.
And I'm glad you mentioned that the pandemic is an act of God, because I've seen some discussion regarding force majeure clauses in contracts. So would the pandemic and the inability to uphold your performance or your end of the bargain in a contract fall under the force majeure clause for contract purposes?
Well, force majeure simply refers to those events for which there can be no human control over. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I don't think anyone wants to blame nursing homes for the pandemic or for causing death or serious illness. What nursing homes will be responsible for is, now that you know that that this emergency exists, how did you respond to that emergency? And that's true whether it's a force majeure or any other type of emergency. Now, I will say that in determining reasonableness of institution response, it will be considered that this is an emergency, and that how one responds in an emergency might be different than how one would respond in non-emergency situations. But in particular, we as the legal system is going to be on the lookout to provide some resource in situations where there is what the law sometimes refers to as willful and wanton misconduct, intentional misconduct, and criminal acts. None of those are protected by force majeure, but just as if you were in a car accident that wasn't your fault, still we ask the medical profession to treat you properly. And that's all we're talking about here for nursing homes is, in light of the resources you have and what you know about what you can and cannot do, did you act reasonably in how you treated the residents?
I agree. I can see that. And COVID-19 liability, what is that? Or is it limited liability? Are there clauses that we should be looking for?
Well, this is going to be very interesting and a bit of a new territory. I think what we're seeing is efforts being made across the country, even some efforts suggested by federal agencies, to provide some level of immunity for care providers regarding treatment of individuals with COVID-19 or exposed to COVID-19. And those provisions have taken different forms in different states. Some try to impose a blanket immunity for harm that occurs during this period of time. And I think there's a lot of concern that that should not happen in a way that masks willful, wanton conduct or criminal conduct. But some states, New York, for example, has provisions that add in a national emergency some protection to care providers from criminal liability. That's not necessarily shared by other states and other jurisdictions. So we see an uneven pattern happening about this attempt at so-called COVID-19 immunity. Immune from what? Against all claims, or just against more typically claims that result from the facility not having adequate supplies or adequate personnel. I think everyone would agree, or at least most of the supporters of some level of immunity, would agree that in the case of a nursing home that's done its best, but didn't have the staff, didn't have the resources, didn't have the masks, didn't have the disinfectant, didn't have the other things that would reasonably be necessary, that there may be some need to protect nursing homes in that type of in this type of emergency situations. But where the challenge is on behavior that goes way beyond that, I think it's a real question as to how effective these so-called COVID-19 immunity provisions will be. We had at least one state that I can think of where the nursing home was directed to specifically take its residents in for COVID-19 testing, and the nursing home refused to do it, and refused to do it several times, so finally they were forced to do it. That's the type of situation that it's unclear whether you really want to provide immunity from liability for that type of behavior. So yeah, we're going to see a wide range of things, and the federal government role is going to be very interesting here, because it's unclear to me that without an act of Congress, whether or not federal immunity provisions can be implemented to control and limit state causes of action.
I was just thinking that when you mentioned that the nursing homes, in a situation where they were unable to get the supplies, that's a valid defense, and then does that bleed over into the federal, claims of action or some nationwide immunity, as you said. So that's interesting. That is. Other than nursing homes, what are the other liability concerns coming from this pandemic?
Well, we probably need to take a close look at how our medical systems respond. Again, did they fairly make use of the resources that they had to provide treatment? Again, failure to diagnose is a mixed issue, because this is such a difficult disease to get a handle on. But once there is an inquiry made, or if a decision was made not to make an inquiry into the existence of COVID-19, those are things that our medical system will need to account for. The other area that's going to be very interesting to see is in terms of the remedies, whether it's vaccines or treatment protocols that our pharmaceutical industry comes up with, how effective those will be in dealing with this, and how safe they will be. I think that we are probably going to have a concern that we don't want to have a treatment that's worse than the disease in terms of risk of safety to individuals. However, there is a great deal of leeway there because of the seriousness of this disease. It may be necessary to provide medical treatments in terms of medicines that have a risk to them. And you have to weigh the risk of the disease against the risk of the medication. And I think that becomes an important calculus in determining whether there's going to be any legal responsibility should something unfortunate happen as a result of trying to treat and help individuals with this disease.
And you raised an interesting point regarding the reliability of the the treatment, and which brings in the federal layer again, because the standard for approving some of these tests, is kind of all over the place right now. So there's so many issues that are, that are still waiting to be discovered with this thing. Well, let's discuss the protests we're seeing in some of the cities over reopening the economy. What's the issue there?
Well, I think that there are individuals who challenge the state's ability to provide for these restrictions over a long period of time. And look, what is at the heart of the protest? What is at the heart is the economy. Individuals who cannot work or who are underemployed or non-employed as a result of efforts being made to control this pandemic. If the jobs were there, you probably would not see the level of protest. And again, it's unclear when we say level of protest, it's unclear exactly how many people are actually protesting. We have some people who are protesting loudly, but we don't necessarily have a significant percentage of the population engaged or supportive of that protest. Most people, at least the polling information I've seen, support the need to impose the types of restrictions that we see. Being restricted from where we go and what we do is something that Americans tend to be very uncomfortable about. But one of the things that has to be remembered is that in many ways we're almost on a war type of footing in terms of emergency response. And so as the country responded to World War II and to World War I, so must we be prepared to recognize the needs of safety. But safety cannot be used as an excuse to eliminate individuals' rights of freedom and ability to express themselves. However, that has to always be taken with a grain of salt, with some reason employed. You may have freedom, for example, as the old from taking a scenario from an old case that we study in law school. You might have the freedom to speak, but that does not necessarily include the freedom to shout fire in a crowded theater. You have a right to be concerned about your individual freedom, but not at the expense of endangering other people. And I think that is where the real contest is happening right now. Has the state gone too far? Well, we don't know. We don't know. There's so many unknown things about this situation that our society has not faced in 100 years, been approximately 100 years since the Spanish flu. And so we are in a very different, very mobile world, a very interconnected world. And how we respond to that requires sacrifices for a lot of people. But at the same time, the government has to be mindful of the impact psychologically and financially on the citizens. You know, one of the things that there hasn't been a great deal of talk about, but I think we have to be concerned about at all levels in our society, is what is the psychological impact on this nation of not only restrictions, but of having this disease. Mental health is going to be a big, big issue on how we deal with this and what the consequences will be. We also need to know, and I think this is part of what the protests are concerned about as well, we also need to know the time frames for governmental action and governmental restrictions. History does have unfortunate examples of emergency steps taken that then become permanent. So we have to be able to balance that and have accountability with our governments about the restrictions that are imposed and when they are to be loosened for the benefit of all of us.
I agree. Those are some really interesting points you raised. Do you have a comment regarding the tracking systems that have been put in place in some other countries that seem to have assisted with slowing it down? And going back to what you were saying about some of these things becoming permanent, I'm sure that that is a concern of many, that all these disclosures, how do you reel them back in when this is over?
I think that's a major concern. So to the extent that protesters are concerned about that, I think they have a reason to be concerned, because we've seen emergency actions take place that permanently alter our lives and our individual liberties. And if I could step out for a second and talk about how we responded to 9/11, I think there's a parallel there. We've seen, as a result of 9/11, restrictions on freedoms and tracking and other information gathering that have now become part of our permanent fabric. And to the extent that those undermine our abilities to exercise our basic individual rights, there is a basis to be concerned. There has to be a watchdog on these things, and there has to be control. The old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions may very well apply here. Yes. That we have to be careful that, we're doing this for your good, we're the good guys doing it now, but if you make changes in our society, in our fabric, that has detrimental effects that outlast the pandemic, then we have to ask ourselves, what real permanent harm are we causing?
Very, very good insight there, Dean Pernell. Anything you'd like to add on COVID-19 before we wrap it up?
Well, I think that the only other thing that I would add is that as a society, and at all phases of our society, whether in the public or the private sector, legal or non-legal, that we have to respond to this crisis in a reasonable manner and not make decisions based on panic or on fear. Trying times like this tempt us to respond to fear. And fear may be the biggest enemy that we have in this situation. So if I could say one word to everyone who might hear this, is make decisions, support decisions that are based on rational, good intentions and not simply based on fear of the unknown.
That is wonderful advice. Thank you, Professor LeRoy Pernell from FAMU College of Law, for that in-depth conversation on COVID-19. We'll be back with more. Let's find out how FAMU College of Law responded to the pandemic from Interim Dean Nicky Boothe.
Hi, this is Nicky Boothe. I am the Interim Dean at Florida A&M University College of Law. Just wanted to provide a quick update to the community regarding the status of the law school. Our students were not required to return from spring break in March. Instead, FAMU Law offered remote classes starting on March 23rd. All our faculty and our students moved to having classes online, and our staff began working remotely. Only essential personnel stayed behind in the building, but we encouraged everyone to stay safe and social distance. We then announced that summer school will also be held remotely. Florida A&M University Law School also offered emergency relief to our students, many of whom had been displaced or had unanticipated expenses as a result of the COVID-19 virus. Plus, the federal government offered the university funds for eligible law students who will also receive additional funding. Our graduation ceremony was virtual this year. And finally, planning is underway for the fall so that we can ensure that whatever we do is in the best interest of our students and will protect the safety and health of our entire College of Law community. We will keep you updated on plans for the fall. In the meantime, stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, Dean Boothe, for that law school update. We know that COVID-19 testing is extremely important. There are multiple testing sites throughout Central Florida and the state. And Florida A&M in Tallahassee is also a testing site. Let's take a look at how it's going.
Florida A&M's Bragg Stadium is hosting a daily walk-up COVID-19 testing site to assist Tallahassee's Southside community in fighting against the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a good deal. The testing is free, but more important, a physician's referral is not required. We spoke with the organizers of this event and FAMU's president about its importance.
We are so glad that you're here today. Keep your spacing like you're doing. The line is moving quickly. We're looking for...
It's really huge for the community that we're in here on the south side of Tallahassee to offer this opportunity for individuals to come and get tested for COVID-19.
Well, today is day one of a 14-day partnership between Bond and Florida A&M University and the Department of Health and Leon County Health Department.
It's really designed to make it convenient for individuals of all types, right? Those who live here in this community.
People who have pre-existing conditions, people who are already at risk, are those that are most vulnerable to this coronavirus.
I think it's very important for the National Guard to be here because it just proves that we're a needed force here in the community, and like we're serving underserved, underprivileged communities right now, and everybody matters in this fight against COVID-19.
9:25 appointment. We can get you through and out in less than 15 minutes. You'll start here, do a little bit of paperwork. They will make sure you are who you say you are, test you, make sure your test has your right name on it, and you come through the line. You go to what we call the bye-bye table and get some information, and you're gone.
With this walk-up testing right now at this particular site, we've also done community-based testing in terms of drive-up facilities.
When we look at access and the fact that we have disproportionately those kinds of conditions, it's really, really significant, because even though this is a storm that we're all in, we're not all in the same boat in the storm because of those inequities.
And as you can tell from this crowd, we have a fairly diverse group of individuals from various venues. From Tallahassee, we have people from Georgia. We also have people who signed up from Alabama.
We are now able to put the full resources of the state behind COVID testing, to bring this testing to folk who may not be able to access it otherwise, or people who have not realized that up until now that you really do need a primary care provider, to make sure that you're first in line when these type of outbreaks and pandemics come. So it's very important that people come and get tested. That's the only way we can identify where we need to put the medical resources, who's infected, who's not, and so that you can better your own health care.
But primarily it gives access to a community of people who suffered, disparately from the health impacts of COVID-19.
The test results will return to us in a minimum of 72 hours, and I'm going to say a minimum of 72 hours after the tests have reached the lab. So we will be flying the test out every afternoon, and within 72 hours, hopefully we will know. The Leon County Health Department is charged by statute of notifying anyone that is positive, because they also have to do what we call contact tracing. Who else have you been around? Anyone that is negative, you're going to get a call from Bond Community Health Center, and we will continue to talk with you and tell you what you need to do during the next 10 to 14 days after you have had this test.
And so we wanted to make sure that what we were doing here is to provide access with no barriers for those that need this testing the most.
A lot of people are taking this very, very serious, and I encourage everyone else to continue to do the things that they need to do to keep themselves safe, their families safe, as well as their communities.
Good job out of FAMU. The testing site is rescheduled to operate for 14 consecutive days from 9 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening Eastern Time. Organizers plan to conduct a maximum of 200 tests, including walk-ups and appointments each day.
Thank you for watching this special COVID-19 edition of Legal Connections. I'm Majeure Morris. Stay safe.